Stop your dreaming, can't you see their spear points gleaming? See their warrior pennons streaming to this battlefield.
Sing!
Men of Alex, stand ye steady.
Come on, sing!
They cannot be ever said ye.
Oh, the battle is already
the mighty foe surrounding, never let on to glory. This will ever be your story. He leaders before ye, which men will not yield.
You think the Welsh can't do better than that, Owen?
Well, they've got a very good base section, mine. But no top tenors, that's for sure.
Stop your dreaming, can't you see their spear points gleaming? See their warrior pennons streaming to this battlefield.
Sing!
Men of Alex, stand ye steady.
Come on,
They
sing!
cannot
Sing!
be ever said ye.
Oh, the battle is already
the mighty foe surrounding, never let on to glory. This will ever be your story. He leaders before ye, which men will not yield. Stand ye steady, in thy Lord's
You think the Welsh can't do better than that, Owen?
Well, they've got a very good base section, mine. But no top tenors, that's for sure.
Assalamualaikum wabarakatuh. I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute, an institute for the humanities and alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. This is day 291 of the project. Our Apocatastasis unified curricula encompassing all of human history in a compact way, appropriate, believe it or not, to our full-time enrolled students, our monthly scholars, our alumni, the general public. You can find out all about the project by going to our website down in the description. And I don't need to remind you that whilst it is the very beginning of summer, there is the autumn semester coming. So if you are intending to enroll in one capacity or another at the Institute, better get your ducks in a row, and we look forward to hearing from you. We do accept students of about 15 years of age on up. So here we are, and we're getting into section basically 10 and 11, which have to do with European colonization in the latter half of the 19th century. We're making our way through H.G. Wells's outline of history. Now, the outline does not encompass the entirety of the project, which is filled out with a monthly cycle of poetry, as well as auxiliary readings spread out over 3 years. None of the readings, poetry or prose, are meant to be the final word. Of course, the purpose of this outline is to have our discussions. The outline and the selections chosen are simply priming the pump for our in-class discussions and our essays and so forth. You might want to look at this as almost a textbook or a catechism, right? Those genres of literature are not, I suppose catechisms are a type of textbook. In any case, they're not meant to be the final word. They're not even meant to encompass much of the subject, but they're meant to organize the material in a specific direction that will be best utilized in class. So anyhow, you can download our text, and we look forward to having you along for the journey. We begin the project once again on the 31st of August this year of grace, 2025, right at the beginning, and make our way through it for the year. So concerning Apocatastasis, I'll bring our great website up, and we'll see what will be our advertisement for today, and then we'll settle in for the topic at hand. There is a great deal happening, and you can find out most of that from our course catalog. So make sure this behaves itself. And if you go to our main page, it's also on our enrollment page, of course, you can see our fall 2025 catalog, a new cover image, and a great deal of new content within. We've expanded our course catalog this time around to include staff biographies and photographs, as well as a section highlighting our collaborations, whether with Vandana Rotaria and EJ classes, with mathematics and cursive, with Lorenzo Malawane and his Forever Forge course, Dr. James Fetzer and his Conspiracies 101, a critical thinking course, Hans Uter, Dr. Uter, and Angela Malik, and their sacred music work. Doubtless I'm forgetting somebody, R. Michael Fisher and his parental consulting, Adam Myers and his mathematical expertise. Adam never ceases to amaze me with some of the references and erudition of himself. All right, I think I got all of the characters mentioned, including this bum here. So, and then we have the course, right? The proper catalog and different inserts and everything. So you can download this free, and hours of reading fun awaits you. So that's our course catalog, and it'll be grand to see you in class. Okay, so let's recap where we've been, and to do that properly, we will have some background music. You didn't think you were getting away without the ambient music, did you? And what shall we have today? The opening audio clip was from the 1964 film Zulu, by the way. which is very much worth watching, as was the still image. And we're going to be getting into that specific event, the battle or the defense of Rourke's Drift, which was the subject of the Michael Caine film et al., 1964. Excellent, excellent movie. Holds up delightfully well. And that scene where the Zulus are groaning and doing their chants, and the British are singing Men of Harlech, that is one of the best scenes in cinematic history as far as I'm concerned. But that will not be very good ambient music now, will it? I think this file entitled Relaxing Music might do the trick. There you go. You're getting sleepy. You're getting sleepy. Okay, so just to recap, I'm not gonna read enough to require the camera, which you can't see here. Right, here's the stream camera. I'm not going to read enough today from the sections 11 and 12 to require that, and to require the time it takes to change the camera. But yeah, we came off the American Civil War. We had a couple classes about that last week, and German unification, and putting everything in the context of politics in Mexico with the French and all sorts of things. Now we move to the East, and these sections 11 and 12 are quite extensively focused on that. Again, this is an outline of history, and this is one of the areas where Wells, like a crocodile, you can see, is biting off a huge amount, maybe more than he can chew. Of course, this whole project, properly speaking, is more than any one man can chew, and necessarily you have to deal with huge subjects with nuances and many vignettes and events in a short amount of time. Hence the repeated plea in this outline of history that we do not have enough time now to discuss X, Y, and Z. That phrase comes up again and again. But in these sections 11 and 12, you really see that he's encompassing a lot of events in a comparatively few amount of words. And so the sweep of this section deals with everything from Napoleon in Egypt to the Sepoy Mutiny, to Gurkha revolts, Boxer rebellions, which we will be looking at this week, events in the Balkans, the Crimean War. And so I thought, as opposed to just doing everything and doing everything poorly, we'll just do one snapshot from that, and the Battle of Rourke's Drift is it. But I do want to read from our text here, just briefly. And this is in this 1961 edition, from page 805. The edition on the website is going to have a different page number, so you want to look up the 19th century chapter and then go to section 12. Section 11. And we begin, and you can just use the find feature on the PDF. We begin with "So began afresh." Just type that into the find section, and you can tune in onto the text here. So began a fresh scramble all over the world, except in the American region, where the Monroe Doctrine was now barred from such adventures for politically uprooted and unprotected lands. Close to Europe was the continent of Africa, full of vaguely known possibilities. This is the scramble for Africa. In 1850, it was a continent of black mystery. Only Egypt and the West Coast were known. A map must be shown to understand the greatness of European ignorance of that time. It would need a book as long as this outline to do justice to the amazing story of the explorers and adventurers who first pierced this cloud of darkness. And to the political agents, administrators, traders, settlers, and scientific men who followed in their track. You would not have that written today. There is something refreshingly of a time in this 1920 book. I'll just say that. Wonderful races of men like pygmies, strange beasts like the Okaipi, marvelous fruits and flowers and insects, terrible diseases, Astounding scenery and forests and mountains, enormous inland seas and gigantic rivers and cascades were revealed a whole new world. Even remains at Zimbabwe of some unrecorded and vanished civilization, the southward enterprise of an early people, were discovered. Into this new world come the Europeans and found the rifle already there in the hands of the Arab slave traders. A Negro life in disorder. By 1900, all Africa was mapped, explored, estimated, and divided between the European powers. Divided with much snarling and disputation into portions that left each power uneasy or discontented, but which remained much the same till 1914. Little heed was given to the welfare of the natives in this scramble. The Arab slaver was indeed curbed rather than expelled. But the greed for rubber, which was a wild product collected under compulsion by the natives of the Belgian Congo, a greed exacerbated by the pitiless avarice of the King of the Belgians, infamously Leopold II, a greed exacerbated, yes, and the clash of inexperienced European administrators with the native population led to horrible atrocities. No European power was perfectly clean in this matter. And there was a book very popular about 20 years ago entitled King Leopold's Ghost, which got into the brutality in the Belgian Congo around this very time, particularly in the hunt for rubber and the mutilation of different rebelling tribes in the Congo. The Congo, of course, that is the setting for The Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad's novella, adapted much later for the screen as Apocalypse Now. And I think Conrad does a good job of encapsulating that spirit of mystery and danger that the jungle must have been to the Europeans. But anyhow, the Belgian Congo, an example of tremendous brutality. All the hands, I think it was all the right hands of certain rebels and the tribesmen were cut off if they didn't produce their quota of rubber. The book, again, is King Leopold's Ghost, and your library very likely has it. Nor can we tell, skipping down, how the British government first led the Boers or Dutch settlers of the Orange River district and the Transvaal set up independent republics in the inland parts of South Africa, and then repented and annexed the Transvaal Republic in 1877. Nor how the Transvaal Boers fought for freedom and won it after the Battle of Mujaba Hill. Mujaba Hill was made to rankle in the memory of the English people by a persistent press campaign. A war with both republics broke out in 1899, a 3 years war enormously costly to the British people, which ended at last in the surrender of the two republics. Their period of subjugation was brief. In 1907, the downfall of the imperialistic government, which had conquered them, the Liberals took the South African problem in hand. There's a Liberal Party in Britain. And these former republics become the free and fairly willing associates with Cape Colony and the Natal and the Confederation of all the states of South Africa as one self-governing republic under the British Crown. And so it goes on about the partition of Africa, closing up this section here. I'm reminded of, I believe, Ewan MacColl's song. I believe he wrote that song, The Old Man's Tale. It opens with, at the turning of the century, I was a lad of 5. Me father went to fight the Boers and he never come back alive. Me mother left to bring us up, no charity she'd seek. So she washed and scrubbed and scraped along on 7 and 6 a week. And it goes on through the 20th century of war and protest. It's a great song, The Old Man's Tale. It might be called The Old Man's Lament sometimes. And there is a feminist version, or rather a female version, that was produced in the 60s, if not the 70s, called The Old Woman's Lament. And follows a similar kind of outline from a wife's point of view, for her sons going off to die and her husband and all this stuff. Great songs, great songs. Anyhow, the Boer War is something that sticks in British memory and song and in story and indeed in history here. And I wanted now to focus on one event, not from the Boer War, but rather from the Zulu episode. And that is the Battle of Rorke's Drift. Once again, we had this image here. This is a huge contest lasting over 12 hours, almost like the Spartans at Thermopylae. The Zulus marshaled everything they had to wipe out a British contingent, and the British fought back, helped immeasurably by their modern weaponry and discipline over the much more disorganized and primitive tribesmen. A tremendous contest and far from home. And there were victories prior to the Battle of Rorke's Drift, as we'll find out. There were victories on the part of the Zulu. Well, the Zulu are in South Africa, aren't they? So, there we go. The same time period in any case. Okay, so here's from the National Army Museum, and it's dealing with the Battle of Rorke's Drift. I'm going to cue up this article here, and we'll hove into it. There we go. Bright as rain. I approve of the color schema, by the way. This is a UK website and UK museum, right? National Army Museum. Fancy that, a British website with green highlighting, huh? Okay, this battle took place on 22nd to 23rd January in 1879 during the Zulu War. A huge force of Zulus attacked a small British garrison, but was eventually repelled after more than 12 hours of bitter fighting. And here we see partially a painting. There we go. Oh, how do I get rid of this? There we go. See a painting. So I guess if I go up, this menu drops down, and then when okay, I could live with that. Okay, so here, as I mentioned, is the defeat that precedes it. The defeat at Isandlwana. We can make this even bigger. And this is the background to Rorke's Drift. So on January in 1879, the British force commanded by Lieutenant General Lord Chelmsford invaded Zululand, aiming to extend the British imperial influence in southern Africa. So this is like a reservation. The army was split into 3 columns. Chelmsford led the central column himself, crossing the Buffalo River and Rorke's Drift mission station to seek out King Chadsiweyo's Zulu army. But the British underestimate their opponent's speed of movement and fighting ability. Much at the same time that Custer was making a similar mistake. When was Custer's last stand? So this is January of 78. Did a bit about the same time, right? Wow, okay, wow. Okay, June of 76. So, I mean, within spitting distance of a similar American defeat in the case of Custer. Just 2 years, less than 2 years removed. You'd think they'd learned. Anyhow, 20,000, far more than Custer ever faced, 20,000 Zulu warriors launched a surprise attack against Chelmsford base camp at Isandlwana. Underprepared and dangerously strung out, the majority of the 1,700 British soldiers there were killed. So this is what precedes the battle we're looking at. That dude definitely needs to get his cardio going on. He's look at this tribesman, the guy in the middle there. Look at him. He needs to get push-ups, sit-ups, jumping jacks. What type of Zulu warrior is it? Look at him, he's a beer belly on him. Young man, too. That guy kind of squatting down there to the left, he needs a good pair of trousers and some fashion sense there. Anyway, you'd dress that way too if you were a Zulu, and you'd probably be out of shape some too. Anyway, the Zulu army immediately pressed on to so they keep the initiative. They're very intelligent. Pressed on to Rorke's Drift, where the British had established a depot and hospital. They were led by Dabu Lamwanzi Khrampande. And that accent and that pronunciation is just as good as you. He was King Clemwekyo's half-brother and had commanded the Undi Corps at Islawana. His men were formidable warriors. They were courageous under fire, maneuvered with great skill, and were adept in hand-to-hand combat. Although they had some old-fashioned muskets and a few modern rifles, most were armed only with shields and spears, to the tremendous intimidation and the tremendous advantage of the British. The Zulus were renowned for their use of the shorter style assegai spear, known as the Ikwa. I need a vowel here, man. Anyway, this thing is said to be named after the sound that was heard as it was withdrawn from the victim's body. Okay, you can keep your vowels in that case. They also carried a shield made of oxide. This combination of shield and spear was deadly when used with careful, coordinated, close combat. So here's our spear. It's not a very long affair, as these things go. So there's the short spear. Here's a Zulu shield, cowhide shield, you can see laid out. So covering a large swath of the body there. Obviously, you'd be facing the different direction when you were using it. Okay, fight or flight. Survivors from Islawana soon reached Rorke's Drift with news of the approaching Zulus. Lieutenants John Chard and Gordon Bromhead met with Assistant Commissary James Dalton of the Commissariat and Transport Department to decide whether they should retreat or defend the station. Remember, the last station was massacred of 1,700 men. You want to do that? You want to be number two? Those sorts of thoughts had to be going through their head. Dalton argued that their small force, traveling in open country and burdened with hospital patients, would easily be caught by the fast-moving Zulus. So it was agreed that they would stay and fight. They set about building improvised barricades from maize bags, biscuit boxes, and crates of tinned meat. Bully beef. Back when they didn't charge you $30 for a roast beef sandwich or corned beef sandwich. The buildings were also loopholed for defense. So they're turning this thing into a makeshift fort. Here's one fella. There's the 19th century for you. So there's Gordon Gonville Bromhead. What a name. But if you had chops like that, you'd want a name like Gonville Bromhead. Back when there were men. And who's this fella here? Good 19th century mustache on him. Lieutenant John Chard. All right. There you go. Okay. Key fact number one, the Army War College, or the National Army Museum. Key fact one, the British garrison at Rorke's Drift consisted only of 150 men, and they faced an army of 4,000 Zulu warriors. So they're very much outnumbered. The defense begins. The Zulu army arrived at Rorke's Drift at 4:30 p.m. They spent the next 12 hours continually storming the British defenses, which were mainly held by soldiers of the 24th Warwickshire Regiment. At first, the Zulus were unable to reach the men behind the barricades. With their spears, many Zulu warriors were shot down. at point-blank range, so they're going to just try to swarm them. almost like the Chinese at Chosun. And the defenders forced back any who did manage to climb over. British soldiers who were too badly wounded to shoot were tasked with reloading guns and distributing ammo to those who could still fire. Many of the Zulus who had firearms lacked training and were thusly poor shots. So once again, we see the role of technology in putting the finger on the scale of military maneuvers. We saw this going back in a very dramatic way in this very section 11 of the Outline of History with Napoleon at the Battle of the Pyramids. Notice they're still using muskets in 1879. They had repeating rifles by this point, but it was still, I mean, the army, any army of whatever country, by definition, is a very conservative force. Often we say that the general staff of an army is fighting the last war. And having lately done a very extensive study of the American Civil War, and that study by Alan Nevins I keep mentioning. Nevins, a logistical writer, an economical writer, points out this in the American Civil War 10 years before. It was feasible to equip the Army of the Potomac with repeating rifles, but it was cheaper and more conservative, more comfortable to the general staff just to continue with the old muskets. That's what everyone knew. So rather than adopting a new technology, you rather keep the old ones and just keep trying to refine the old technology. So as the battle raged on, the Zulus targeted the hospital. They set fire to the building, burst, and begun killing the patients with their spears. But the defenders managed to push them back with bayonets with their own spears. The surviving patients were rescued after the soldiers hacked holes in the walls, separating the rooms, and dragged them through into the barricaded yard. As night fell, the British withdrew to the center of the station, where a final defense had been hastily built. They eventually succeeded in fighting the Zulus off. Key fact 2, by the end of the fighting at Rorke's Drift, 400 Zulus, that's 10% of the force, lay dead on the battlefield. Only 17 British were killed, but almost every man in the garrison had sustained some form of wound. So here's the storehouse, we're informed, of Rorke's Drift. So this is not a formidable structure at all. You can see the crenulated walls there, right, for defense, along with the rifle holes. But this does not even have the type of defensive perimeter that the Alamo would have had a few decades before. Another improvised fort. The outcome. So after the disaster of Islawana, the stand at Rorke's Drift was a welcome boost to British morale, but it had little effect on the Zulu War as a whole. The conflict continued for several months until the Zulu were finally defeated in July of 79. So that is, 6 months later, at the Battle of Ulundi. The king was later hunted down and captured, and the Zulu monarchy was suppressed, and Zululand divided into autonomous areas. In 87, it was declared a British territory and become part of the British colony of Natal 10 years later, just in time for the Boer War. Okay. 11 Victoria Crosses, which would be like our Medal of Honor, and 5 distinguished conduct medals were awarded to the survivors of Rorke's Drift. One of these went to Corporal Christian Schließ. Born in Switzerland, he later settled in South Africa and joined the British colonial unit serving throughout the Zulu War. Schließ displayed great bravery at Rorke's Drift, and he fought off the Zulus throughout the night despite being wounded in the foot. He became the first Swiss national to be awarded a Victoria Cross, and the first man serving the South African forces to be decorated with the Supreme British Award for gallantry. Despite his heroism, Schließ struggled to find work after the war, like many an old soldier, ended up living in poverty. And here, I suppose, is the Victoria Cross, and so it is. So, at the ribbon there, right? And then the metal. Men will do tremendous things, Napoleon said, for scraps of metal and a ribbon. I think it was Napoleon who invented the whole idea of medals for gallantry and bravery and whatever. Legacy. The British government seized upon the successful defense of Rorke's Drift, issuing awards to the survivors in the hope of diverting public attention away from the disaster of Isla, where 1,700 men near enough were killed. But this didn't work. Benjamin Disraeli and his administration lost the 1880 election, and brought down in part by the events of the Zulu War in the previous year. Even so, it was the heroism of Rorke's Drift, rather than the defeat of Isla, that passed it into British folklore. We have a sketch of the battle. Okay, and it goes on here. Briefly, let's just be tight against what we mean by the Boer War. Just some basics, and then we'll knock off for the day here. But again, this is just one snapshot of a whole colonial chapter that's happening in Africa and Central Asia and in the Far Orient at this time. And this section and the following really do get into this. But again, Wells is really trying to encompass a lot here in a little. So I thought it best just to focus on one notable event, if only to get the Men of Harlech sung. All right, so we'll read a little definition here of the Boer War, and okay, cool, it comes up. Okay, the Boer War, also known as the Second Boer War or the South African War, was a conflict fought between the British Empire and the two Boer republics of the Transvaal and the Orange Free State in South Africa from 1899 to 1902. The war was primarily sparked by tensions over British imperial ambitions and the discovery of gold and diamonds. Aha! That's why everyone's interested in this part of the world, in the Boer territories. A few causes. The British Empire aimed to expand its control in South Africa, leading to friction with the Boer republics. The discovery of gold, the Boer resistance. The Boers, descendants of Dutch settlers, fiercely resisted British expansion and sought to maintain their independence. The Jameson raid. Jameson, this is the same guy who started the whiskey company, the Irish guy. The exact same guy. A failed attempt by British forces to overthrow the Boer government in 1895 further fueled tensions. Okay, so it goes on. So this is in the decade after the Battle of Isla and Rorke's Drift. So there we go. It's one snapshot from colonial history. And again, it's easy now, and maybe justified, maybe not, to be critical of colonialism, but there is that aspect, and you cannot escape it in the 19th century, of progress and the remarkably different states of technological progress when you compare European civilization and branch civilization to other parts of the world. And you bet your bippy, as the British say, very appropriate for today's subject, you can bet your bippy that discrepancy, the profoundly primitive nature of these peoples that the British and the French and the Dutch were coming across, did a lot to justify colonialism in the context of the times, whether that's medical technology or whatever. And building off of that, the appeal to, well, we're bringing X, Y, and Z of modern civilization to these otherwise Stone Age peoples. So that's simply not to advocate for colonialism, but to, again, like we say so much, like I said, with slavery in the run-up to the American Civil War or whatever, you have to put yourself as a good historian in the time period, in the 19th century, and the fact that a lot of inventions which have now been sloshed all over the world and whatnot, the civilizational difference of where all this was coming from, and then the deeper meditation of why one part of the world was so fundamentally advanced, building into philosophical and worldview conclusions. All of this helps to explain a certain justification at the time for colonialism. And part of that is military. You can see that discrepancy there. So with that being said, we'll bring the bird down, looking at the battle, the defense of Rorke's Drift. Tomorrow, we're going to get into Far Asia, and we're going to look at, in particular, the Boxer Rebellion. Another inconvenient, rather unpleasant event of colonial relations, in addition to today's Zulu episode, and of course the Sepoy Mutiny in India, in between these two areas. So again, at the time, some of those subject populations were not so impressed by that appeal to technological and civilizational difference enough that they would exert themselves in arms. So we'll look at that. We'll look at the British and others in China tomorrow, and the Chinese response to that. Just wanted to say, as we're knocking off here, again, this is the very boiled down general public outreach of the project here at Apocatastasis, which is our unified teaching of history and literature. We accept students for full-time enrollment of about 15 years of age on up. We also have monthly options for students who are more pressed for time, maybe a little bit farther along in life with more obligations. And you can find out all about that by going to our enrollment and matriculation tab on our website. And specifically about the project, you can check down below in the description and download the outline of history and the poetry cursus, and join us in our adventure through human history and human literature. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you tomorrow for the Boxer Rebellion. Masalama.